Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. This is your host, Amina Ahmed, and you're watching Muslim Network TV. Welcome back to another episode of Next Gen, where we seek to amplify the voices of our future generation of young people, young change makers across the globe. A topic that we have discussed over and over again on Next Gen, the situation of minorities in India. And we've looked at it from different angles. We've spoken to student activists on the ground in India fighting against the oppression of India's minorities. But today we look at a completely new perspective. The fight of Hindus against Hindutva, Hindu nationalism. And to discuss this today, we have with us a representative of Hindus for Human Rights, a youth representative, Harita. Harita is the communications and outreach coordinator for Hindus for Human Rights. She's a current master's candidate at GW School of Media and Public Affairs, where she studies media and strategic communication. Harita's primary academic and political interests lie in ethno-religious and tribal peace building and conflict resolution in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. She has focused particularly on the crisis in Palestine, Afghanistan, Yemen, and India. Thank you so much, Harita, for being a young person and doing this work, for being a change maker in our generation and a voice, from the Hindu community against the oppression that we are seeing from the Hindu majority in India right now.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Harita, I have been, personally connected to Hindus for Human Rights. I see their work, as a Muslim for the past few years. Now, when did you get involved in Hindus for Human Rights? And I kind of want to hear about what led you to getting involved in that, because you have been working in so many different conflicts already, and now you're taking on India as well.
Yeah, so I have been studying conflict resolution, religious conflict and tensions for a few years now in my undergrad. And I am just really passionate about building relationships between cultural groups, ethnic groups, religious groups. And I came to Hindus for Human Rights because as a Hindu, I am very passionate about human rights and the teachings of our religion. And it was really upsetting to see, or it has been really upsetting to see my faith be corrupted by Hindutva, by Hindu nationalists. And so I thought this was a perfect opportunity for me to get involved in human rights work through the lens and background of my faith, something that I hold very closely to me, something that my family has, taught me very deeply. And I thought using that lens towards human rights, something that I'm passionate about, something I've studied and worked towards, would be a really great opportunity, and getting involved in the fight against him especially. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's so important that we have voices from your faith. And I think as a Muslim, it's something that kind of hits close to home, having your faith hijacked by people that, the majority of the faith doesn't even agree with, but those are the people that are represented. Those are the people that sometimes are in power as well. So tell us about the work of Hindus for Human Rights. For someone who doesn't, really know about Hindus for Human Rights, who hasn't volunteered for it like you and I and worked for that organization.
Yeah, so Hindus for Human Rights aims to present and push a progressive message of Hinduism, and exactly what you're saying, retake our faith from those who have chosen to vilify it vilify the image of Hindus by using religion for evil, by oppressing Muslims and Christians and Dalits and, India's minorities. So we're using a progressive lens of Hinduism to advocate for human rights and justice in India, press freedoms, and other human rights that are so important and that are slowly being stripped by the Indian government, a Hindutva regime under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So we do a lot of policy work, advocacy, community building, just providing a space for people who are rightly upset with how the Indian government has chosen to oppress minorities, has chosen to give a bad name to the Hindu faith, and providing a space for people to come together and, just rejoice in the good teachings of Hinduism and do so in a community space as well.
Right. And what have you guys been able to accomplish so far in Hindus for Human Rights? I know that, your message is strong, your goals are there, but what have we been able to accomplish so far?
Yeah, so we've been able to accomplish a lot through our advocacy on a community level, whenever there are hateful events that are occurring pushed by Hindutva groups in the US, we've been able to launch petition campaigns and protests and been able to get those events canceled, or bringing attention to those and those events and Hindutva groups in the US. We've been able to work with policymakers to bring attention to the conditions in India and push for recognition of the gross violations of human rights in India, and a lot more.
That's amazing to hear. Now, in the group, in Hindus for Human Rights, what kind of age group are we looking at? Are we seeing a lot of young people involved in the fight against Hindutva, as we see young people in the fight, for Palestinians and for Syrians and for the people of Yemen? We see that we see young people at the core of these fights. Do we see that in the fight of against the oppression of minorities in India?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the activists and people that we work with on the ground tend to be young people, and it's really inspiring to see them. And I think something that I would like to bring to our diaspora and to stress within people in our age group in the U.S. is that we have the privilege and opportunity to speak up about the things that are happening around the world without the fear of repression that so many activists, journalists, academics in India face and around the world. So that's why our responsibility lies in speaking up, because we don't face the same fear of repression here in the US. And as young people, I think it's really important because we sometimes people tend to think, oh, you're young, you don't really know a whole lot about the world, but it's a really great way to be like, hey, I do know a lot about the world actually, and it's something that I'm passionate about and care about. So I think bringing together young people is something that we're really aiming to, and definitely in our community itself, we've seen a lot more young people join because they feel upset about the things that are happening in the US and in India and in the diaspora as well, and they're really starting to take charge.
That's awesome. Haritha, I love what you said about the fact that we in America have the privilege to speak up. I know that, many people who don't know much about India may not see the fact that young activists are being imprisoned, their families are threatened for the work that they do, and it makes it very difficult. And still they're persisting, still they're speaking up, they're speaking truth to power. So kind of what does that put on us? What responsibility do we have to speak up? But I know that there are still some people that kind of maybe from the older generation think, what is the point? What can we sitting here in the United States do to impact India? What is your message to those people? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think to both old and young people, it sometimes does feel a little isolating. Being in the US, you feel, oh, I'm not living in India. I can't do anything about it. I feel powerless about what's happening. Or, the other side of that, which is like a little bit of an indifference, saying, oh, it's not my problem. I'm not there, so I can't do anything about it. And I would say, again, it's this responsibility. We live in the US. India is our homeland, it's our country. It's where our parents come from, our grandparents, if you were born here, or if you were, immigrated from India itself, like that. I think that for me provides like a moral responsibility itself, not even just like a political responsibility. And I think that my message to them would be there is so much that you can do within the US, joining these community groups and organizations that do policy work, advocacy work, just changing the mentality within our communities that we can't do anything is something that I think is really important, because I know, like in my personal experience, when I've talked to my parents and their friends about issues that are happening in India, for me, it's an obvious thing. I'm like, oh, of course I would care. This is something that's happening in our country, and I care about, the longevity of our country, of the beautiful culture, all of those things. And they get a little confused because they're like, well, what can I do? And I'm like, you can lobby your politicians, you can get involved in your community, you can start changing things at a lower local level and then build your way up. And just even speaking up about it and showing people in India that you stand in solidarity with them is honestly like the first step. So I would say there's a lot of ways to get involved, and it, even though it is hard and it feels hopeless at sometimes, you might as well try.
Right. And I feel like even if I was told by an older activist at one point in my life that even if you don't see the fruits of the work that you are doing, the fact that you are even doing that work is important. You may not see the results, and I don't think many of us kind of, in the activism field, we look for results knowing that it's a very long fight. But thank you for the work that you are doing, Harita. We will be right back after our short break. You're all watching us on Muslim Network TV. We stream on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV. We'll be right back on Next Gen. Welcome back to Next Gen. I'm here with Harita Iswara, a youth leader in Hindus for Human Rights, an organization that is made up of primarily Hindus advocating against the oppression of minorities in India. Thank you so much, Harita, once again for being with us here today. Now, Harita, one question that I ask many activists from across different fields who have been working in different countries, and I see very different responses. So I'm interested to ask you, are you hopeful for the future in India?
That's a difficult question. As you said, you're getting different responses. I think I am hopeful because it's been a country that has, experienced so many different changes and so many different things throughout the years, throughout the centuries. And I think politically, it's really important to remember that, like you said earlier, changes don't occur so quickly. We might not see the fruits of our labor immediately, but because so many people care and so many people are concerned for the democracy in India and for human rights conditions, everything, I think because people care, there is a reason to have hope because that's what leads to change.
Thank you for answering that. It's always so interesting because, sometimes I hear from activists that they're like, I'm tired. I'm just done. There has been so much work that I'm doing. I'm not seeing, results in my country. How do you not burn out as a young person? How do you protect yourself? You have so much energy. You are so passionate, but how is that? How are you sustaining that? I want to know, for myself, for other activists out there, how to not burn out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say burnout is definitely a big thing that occurs. I would say at least once every other week, I just sit there and I'm like, oh, this is really hard. But for me, again, living in the US, it might be hard to just, advocate and do things on my behalf, but I'm not the person that's living through it on the ground in India. So I just started to think about like what people are actually going through, and that kind of keeps me going because it makes me remember that there is a bigger picture here and that there is a bigger movement that we're all a part of. And if we don't take care of ourselves on the side and practice self-care, all those things, we can't contribute our part to the movement. And I think that's what keeps me going overall, and just the love and belief that I have in the democracy of India and my family, the connections, everything I have. I just think that those things combined together keeps me going.
That's awesome. And I like that you say that without taking care of yourself, you cannot do the work that you're doing. That's so important. Sometimes I think we get so caught up that we forget to kind of breathe and take some time to ourselves so that we can be fueled to do the work that is important, to passionately advocate. So that's amazing that you are making sure to, hopefully, Harita, to take care of yourself firstly. Now tell us about what the goals for HFHR are for the upcoming year, for this year, actually, for 2023. What do you guys hope to accomplish?
Yeah, I think our biggest goals are just to expand our reach, our outreach, building our community. I think last year was a very successful year for us. We made several media appearances. We had hundreds of people come to our events over the year. Collectively, we had virtual events, in-person events. I think we just really want to build on that success of last year and just grow and make sure that we can continue this messaging of a progressive Hinduism and bring more people into our fold, make more policy changes gradually, connect to different leaders in different communities, and just grow our outreach throughout the country and throughout the diaspora, expand into Canada. We have a chapter in Australia and New Zealand, so help them expand as well. And also just do some more work on the ground here as well as in India, and connect to religious leaders and activists, journalists, academics, you name it. Just try to build our outreach and build the community that we have around the central message of a progressive Hinduism.
That's awesome. I think numbers are definitely powerful. They give a message of solidarity and support, especially like you said, we raising our voices here is a message to those back home in India of solidarity and of also of resistance to those who are oppressing the minorities back home. So Harita, what is your message to other young people who, are passionate about a cause? It might not be India, it might be a different cause, but they don't know how to get involved. They don't know how to get into activism or advocacy or organizing. How do they get started?
That is a very good question, because that was kind of my position as well. I started organizing politically in high school, but before that, I had no idea about, political organizing, community organizing, anything. And I started out in gun violence prevention, and protection against gun violence in high school, is much like many activists in the U.S. our age. And I think getting involved is kind of difficult if you don't have access to, higher education, because a lot of the time people start activism and organizing in college. I think just like talking to people, and we have the gift of social media. I think looking up things that, pertain to your interests, whether it's India, human rights, the environment, gun violence prevention, or anything like that. I think using the tools around you and talking to people who you may know tangentially, and finding a way to get involved, and obviously like just having that passion and continuing on, is definitely a great way to get started. If you don't have the passion yet, something I'm sure will radicalize you, something will motivate you to get involved. And I would say just look out for that and feed that flame.
Thank you, Harita, for your message to our young people who are viewing, to our viewers. I want to say as well that we have so much information. You literally have to search up the organization that is pertaining to your interests, and they always have, like you said, resources to get involved. Harita, how can our young viewers get involved in HFHR?
Yeah, so definitely visit us at hindusforhumanrights.org. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram, and get involved. Definitely looking to do some more campus outreach and youth organizing and activism this year. So please stay in touch, and get involved with the fight.
Thank you so much, Harita, for the work that you are doing, for being on our show, and for being so empowering. Thank you so much. And to our viewers who are watching us here on Next Gen, we'll be back next week at 7 p.m. Central Time on Next Gen. We're streaming on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Galaxy 19 satellite. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all.